There has been an increase in talk in Europe and East Asia recently about nuclear proliferation. The main reason have been the irresponsible actions of the world's two biggest nuclear powers. I believe the past is very instructive on this topic, but not the story of existing nuclear powers and their bombs. We all know how and why they got the bomb. I believe we can learn a lot on this topic by looking at the countries that tried to get the bomb, but in the end didn't get the bomb. These countries and their programs are largely unknown to us and may give us insights into what the future may look like if nuclear proliferation becomes more attractive or even spreads. Sweden. Yes, the nice, friendly, peace-loving Swedes once had a secret nuclear weapons program. Why? The Second World War left a deep impression on Sweden. As a neutral state, it may have stayed out of the war, but Sweden also got a front row seat at seeing almost every other neutral state getting Belgiumed. It was also not lost on the Swedes that they were next in line and that there were German plans to invade and occupy them. The end of the Second World War also saw Sweden sitting a Baltic coastline away from an aggressive and expansionist Soviet Union that had just gobbled up much of the Baltic coast. The Soviets opened Cold War relations with the Swedes by shooting down a Swedish plane over international waters, violating Swedish waters with submarine incursions, and trying to blackmail Sweden into leaving the island of Gotland undefended with threats of invasion. To add to that, the Swedes remembered what their Finnish neighbors went through in 1939 and knew if the Soviets ever invaded, they would also have to fight alone. Combined with the fact that the Soviets got the bomb, Sweden began a secret nuclear weapons program and got very close, within just a year of having the bomb by 1962. The Swedish program was meant to be entirely defensive, not to be used on Soviet territory, but on Soviet armies advancing into Sweden in case of an invasion. By the mid-1960s, the Détente and arms control treaties cooled down the Cold War tensions. The Swedes ended their nuclear weapons program and decided to focus on diplomacy as a means of ensuring peace. The reason Sweden used to pursue the bomb is simple. It was threatened. There was another country that had a secret nuclear weapons program that was similar to the Swedish one: Yugoslavia. Yugoslavia was haunted by the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, when the Nazis and Soviets conspired to divide up Poland. Now squished between NATO and the Warsaw Pact, Yugoslavia believed that the same fate could befall them. The result was one of the largest defense programs in Europe, arming Yugoslavia to the teeth, and also a clandestine nuclear weapons program. Speaking of things you may want to keep secret, here's a reminder of how important it is to keep sensitive data secure and to yourself, which includes your personal online data. Your internet privacy and security is important, and ExpressVPN is a great tool for you to keep your personal data secure. With ExpressVPN, 100% of my network traffic is encrypted and kept safe. It works on all devices, and with its optional dedicated IP service, even ExpressVPN cannot track my IP. Easy to use, just load up, click and go, and I'm now check online with no one able to track who I really am. I have come to value this service a lot recently because I have become increasingly concerned about my personal data and who has access to it. As an added bonus, I can change my online location with ExpressVPN, log in from whatever country I want to pretend to be, and browse whatever Netflix has available for me there. You can protect your online privacy today by going to expressvpn.com/Kraut. The link is also in the description, or use the QR code on the screen right now to find out how you can get up to 4 extra months for free. Thank you to ExpressVPN. Being a very dysfunctional state, research was split into 3 separate research institutes in Croatia, Slovenia and Serbia, which resulted in constant accidents and constant delays to overcome because of a lack of coordination. Yugoslavia first got its nuclear material from the Soviets, but after Stalin tried to have Tito killed, that stopped, causing even more delays. Adding to this entire clusterfudge of a mess, the program cost around €500 million per year in today's money. By far the most impressive thing about the Yugoslav nuclear weapons program is that their intelligence service successfully stole enough heavy water and enriched uranium needed for several bombs from a Norwegian nuclear research facility. But besides that, the program was shut down, then turned on again, then turned off again. Then the Indians became the first non-aligned state with the bomb, and Yugoslavia became seething envious because they wanted to be the leader of the non-aligned movement, so it was turned on again. When the Yugoslav economy started collapsing, more cost cuts were made, sometimes in the most insane of places. For example, the warehouse in Serbia, where enough highly enriched nuclear material for several dozen bombs was stored, was guarded by a single Serb police officer with a wire fence. The Yugoslav nuclear weapons program was very dangerous. But not dangerous in that Yugoslavia could have gotten the bomb and potentially used it, but dangerous for Yugoslavia. Dangerous in how irresponsible the Yugoslavs were in handling nuclear material and basically playing chicken with the possibility of there being a nuclear accident. One of the main lessons the Yugoslav program shows us is that making the bomb is dangerous. After the collapse of Yugoslavia, the Serbs sold everything to the Russians. There's another country with a secret nuclear weapons program similar to that of Yugoslavia: Egypt. For Egypt, there was one single defining moment that made them want to get the bomb: the Suez Crisis. Even though the Americans and Soviets teamed up and forced the British and French out while telling them that the age of European empires was over, Egypt didn't fully trust that promise enough. Let's take a step back. The Suez Canal makes Egypt one of the single most valuable pieces of real estate on this planet. Owning this real estate means you can control which Asians have access to Europe and which Europeans have access to Asia. Every post-colonial state to a degree fears the return of empire, but Egypt worries about that more than most. Because if empire ever does come back, then the Egyptians are, with their unusually high-value geography, in the unfortunate position of being the primary target of any new empire in a hypothetical new age of imperialism. So when the Suez Crisis was over, the Egyptians began secretly working on the bomb. The Soviets provided research reactors and Egypt refused to sign the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. When China got the bomb in 1964, Egypt was very delighted and overjoyed, but then China refused to share it with them. Then the Six-Day War wrecked the Egyptian military. The enormous costs of rebuilding the army coincided with the decline of the Egyptian economy and the failure of Arab socialism, making it clear that the bomb was unaffordable. Then Israel got the bomb. Egypt signed the Non-Proliferation Treaty and adopted a new stance as one of the most vocal opponents of nuclear proliferation in the world, and the loudest opponent of nuclear weapons being developed or deployed to the Middle East. In a weird way though, this was not the end of this particular story, because many of the Egyptian nuclear engineers who had worked on the Egyptian bomb went to Iraq, where Saddam Hussein pursued the bomb after it became obvious that the Israelis had it. Iraq got a French reactor to work on the program, and then the Israelis bombed it. Iraq shares this experience with another country, its neighbor Syria, because Assad got the idea in his head that the bomb may make up for his lack of chin, and then the Israelis bombed it. We can learn a simple truth about nuclear proliferation here. Once a country acquires the bomb, it will try to prevent others from getting the bomb. But paradoxically, having the bomb makes your neighbors also want the bomb. So you end up in a situation that significantly increases the regional potential for conflict. There's something else here that we learn. While the Assad regime believed that the bomb was going to secure it, it failed to realize that how this regime treated its own people was what would actually bring it down. And there's another country where this lesson also applies: Libya. In the 1970s, Libya bought a large arsenal of modern weapons from Czechoslovakia and the Soviet Union. They immediately used that arsenal to invade their neighbor Chad, only to get absolutely mauled by Chad's Toyota pickup trucks. Humiliated by this, Libya tried to get the bomb, but tried doing so on the cheap. Libya spent decades basically begging other nuclear powers for the bomb and nuclear material. When communism died, Libya tried really hard to scramble together a bomb from the black markets of communist bloc weapons arsenals. All these attempts failed, and in the end, it wasn't foreign powers who threatened that regime, but how that regime treated its own people. What is impressive, though, is that the regime managed to keep its nuclear weapons program secret for decades, and it is not the only country that managed to do that. There is also Romania.
The following segment of the video was produced by Poland Ball Official, the YouTube channel of the artists who run the Poland Ball subreddit.
Yes, your eyes do not deceive you. Romania had a secret nuclear weapons program. And the reason that you, and even many Romanians, have never heard of it, was that it was successfully kept completely secret. The reason Romania wanted the bomb was to escape. Ceausescu hated the Warsaw Pact, and he really hated the Soviet Union, who he saw as arrogant, condescending, and a threat to his rule. The only country in the region that Ceausescu got along with was Yugoslavia. Ceausescu didn't just want the bomb for defense. He had a plan for Romania. Get the bomb, leave the Warsaw Pact, declare neutrality, form an alliance with Yugoslavia, and join the non-aligned states. Ceausescu had to be extremely careful, because the moment the Soviets would have found out, they probably would have repeated what happened to Czechoslovakia in 1968. And if the Americans had found out, they probably would have told the Soviets. So to deceive two sides with one scheme to benefit himself, Ceausescu got American uranium through the Atoms for Peace program, while lying to the Americans that it was just for nuclear reactors, and began to secretly build his bomb. That way, if the Soviets had found out, He could have then roped the Americans into it to either defend himself or look bad by letting Romania get invaded. The Romanians started building the bomb in the 1970s, and never quite got there. The program probably substantially contributed to the impoverishment of Romania, though. And when the regime fell, the new government shut down the program the moment they found out about it. This one is very interesting, because the primary use of the Romanian bomb was not to defend oneself, or to assert oneself on the global stage, but to escape a sphere of influence. If we're now again entering a world order where the self-proclaimed global powers try to carve up spheres of influence, this idea of an escape plan bomb may become relevant again.
Let's now talk about another country that you may be surprised to know had a secret nuclear weapons program: Japan. Japan is the only country against which the bomb was used, which Japan likes to remind everyone of, and some Japanese use to portray themselves as victims of the Second World War. What is less well known, and might surprise some of you, is that Japan had its own nuclear weapons program during the Second World War. There's a degree of Western-centric miseducation responsible here. In the West we learn much about the Second World War in Europe, but barely enough about the Second World War in Asia. There are also a lot of alt history novels, TV shows and video games set around the terrifying scenario of what the world would look like if the Nazis had gotten the bomb first. The Nazi bomb is the ultimate horror scenario for an alternative history, but what makes all of these scenarios so weirdly Western-centric and false is that Japan got far closer to getting the bomb than the Nazis did. Japan had a far more advanced nuclear weapons program than the Nazis, and not only would Japan have gotten the bomb before the Nazis, Japan was by some estimates just a year behind the Americans in getting the bomb. So why did the Japanese bomb fail? The Japanese Army, the Japanese Navy, the Japanese National Institute for Physical and Chemical Research, and eventually a political splinter group within the Japanese Navy all pursued their own separate nuclear weapons programs. The result of that was in effect that Japan competed with itself over which military branch could get the bomb first, rather than working together to compete with the Americans. The Japanese bomb, however, did live on beyond the war, just not in Japan. Much of the industrial infrastructure to build the Japanese bomb, such as for the production of heavy water and the centrifuges used for uranium enrichment, had been built in occupied Korea. And when the Soviets invaded Korea, these were brought back to the Soviet Union and used to make the Soviet bomb. One thing you can learn here, just as with the Egyptian nuclear engineers, is that a nuclear program can live on beyond its official end by falling into someone else's hands. Japan, to this day, has the know-how, the capital, the industrial capacity, and the resources to make the bomb. The only reason Japan doesn't make the bomb is because it chooses not to make the bomb. And we should not forget that, especially in a time when nuclear proliferation becomes more attractive to countries that previously abandoned such projects. And Japan happens to not be alone in this category. There's also South Korea. Korea's first experience with the bomb was not Korean, but as you now know, Japanese. Japanese factories and plants to produce heavy water and the centrifuges used for uranium enrichment were set up in Korea and worked by Korean slave laborers. After the war, the Soviets took everything for their own bomb, and Korea didn't pursue the bomb itself. But after the Vietnam War, Korea got its own nuclear ambitions. When the Americans abandoned South Vietnam, and it just collapsed within a few days, South Korea began to worry that if it ever came to war with the North, the Americans might also just abandon them. So beginning in the 1970s, the South Koreans began a clandestine nuclear weapons program. The South Koreans had to start from scratch with clandestine research on enriching uranium conducted throughout South Korean science institutes during the 1980s. This program, however, came to a halt with the end of the South Korean dictatorship, and when the US invaded Iraq, the South Koreans decided to make it public to avoid any fallout from having had a hidden nuclear weapons program. In some ways, even though there is often talk in the media about South Korean nuclear proliferation, the program is very overrated and didn't go that far, which is also the case with another country, Germany. The Nazi nuclear program is very overrated. Yes, I know we like to imagine the dystopian scenarios of the Nazi bomb in novels, movies, and video games, and I am sure the History Channel can make yet another several dozen documentaries with overly dramatic, hyped-up American narration. Yes, Nazis are horrible and evil, but never forget, Nazis are also very stupid. They drove most of their leading nuclear scientists out of the country. They thought the entire scientific field of quantum physics was a Jewish conspiracy. They believed in crackpot nonsense like world ice theory. And then there is German bureaucracy, which divided nuclear research into a dozen competing research institutes tied together through a paper hellscape. But above all, and this is why all the theories about the Nazi bomb are so wrong, the primary purpose of Nazi German nuclear research was not the bomb. The Nazis actually tried to make a nuclear reactor. And here's something that may surprise you. The Nazi research into nuclear energy actually got a second life. After the war, the French scoured through the former Nazi nuclear research sites in occupied Germany. They took both material and scientists back to France, where it was used to create the impressive nuclear energy industry that France is so famous for today. The Germans didn't really start taking the bomb seriously until the Cold War, and their program was very unconventional. Because the long process of scientists and engineers developing a bomb was a non-starter for a Cold War Germany, the German government of the 1950s and 1960s developed a secret military plan that in case of a US withdrawal from NATO, the German army would forcefully occupy all American military bases in Germany and seize control of all American nuclear weapons stationed in Germany to reverse engineer their own bomb. When the Social Democrats got elected into power, they thought this was nuts and got rid of all of it. Yet there's still a thing to learn here. Think of the impact it would have if those with the bomb left an alliance on those who don't have the bomb. Another thing to learn here, and this is important and often overlooked, it is not only possible but easy to reverse engineer and make the bomb if you can get your hands on one that you stole from someone or on a bomb that someone lost. When Ukraine gave up its bombs in 1994, it did not matter that they didn't have the button. Having a bomb is enough to reverse engineer it. There are 6 American and around 100 Soviet bombs that were lost during the Cold War, most beneath the ocean and in the Arctic. Getting one of them would give you a huge jumpstart in making the bomb. There is a country that is a prime example of this. This country actually did get their hands on a bomb that a nuclear power lost, and then used it to try to reverse engineer the bomb. Spain. It is said that when the bomb drops, only cockroaches survive, and Francoist Spain was the fascist cockroach, the only fascist regime that managed to survive the flames of the Second World War, the last of the fascist regimes surrounded by a world that largely despised it, and that isolation certainly encouraged it to get the bomb. The most significant moment, though, was when Morocco declared independence in 1956. Morocco was a French colony, with Spanish-governed enclaves all over the country. The Spanish also occupied West Sahara and really wanted all of Morocco. So when Morocco instead declared independence, it led to a war between the two from 1957 to 1958. And it was here where Spain decided to get the bomb. The Spanish bomb was not intended as a means of deterrence, but as a weapon to keep its African colonies, and force Morocco into becoming a Spanish colony again, to possibly even rebuild a Spanish empire in West Africa. The way the Franco regime wanted to use the bomb is in many ways how Russia wants to use the bomb today, as a weapon of blackmail and conquest. Nuclear imperialism. The Spanish economic miracle of the early 1960s made the funds available, and Spain bought a French nuclear reactor. Some of you will have noticed that most clandestine nuclear weapons programs involve French nuclear reactors. That's because the French don't do inspections of the reactors they sell. A problem Spain had, though, is that its scientists did not have the know-how or expertise of how to build the bomb. Their big breakthrough came in 1966 when an American nuclear bomber crashed in Spanish airspace and 3 of its 4 bombs were lost in Spain. The Americans recovered the bombs, but were not thorough enough. The Franco regime was able to recover enough debris and even nuclear material to reverse engineer the process of how to make the bomb. This set Spain on course to getting the bomb by the mid-1970s, but then, within 2 years, it all fell apart. It started in 1973 when the CIA found out, and Nixon was furious. He had visited Franco 3 years before and wanted to normalize the Franco regime on the global stage. Now, Franco stabbed him in the back. In December of that same year, the man in charge of the nuclear weapons program was assassinated by the Basque terror group ETA. There are a lot of conspiracy theories about this assassination. It was, after all, the most important political assassination in recent European history, because Luis Carrero Blanco was also said to be Franco's successor, and this assassination pretty much started the end of the Franco regime. There are conspiracies that the CIA, Mossad, or the KGB actually pulled the strings of this assassination, and to be clear, all these conspiracies are false. There is no evidence for any of this. The Basque terror group ETA just got really lucky. But the conspiracy theories are still worth mentioning. They ultimately still matter here, because the Franco regime believed them, and it spooked the regime so much that it paused the nuclear weapons program in 1974. Then, Morocco forced Spain into giving up its colony of West Sahara, putting another big nail into the coffin of the nuclear program. And finally, a year later, Franco died. Democracy returned to Spain, and the program was completely dismantled. It is important to take a step back here and appreciate something. This wasn't just a defensive bomb, or just the Spanish bomb. What happened here is that 30 years after the Second World War, there was almost a fascist bomb. It is worth sitting on that fact and let it sink in a bit, to have a little discussion about something. Whatever your opinion may be on interventions, be they military or other, there is a case to be made here that some regimes should never be allowed to get the bomb. There was another Western dictatorship that also tried to get the bomb. Actually, two: Brazil and Argentina. The way this came to be is somewhat comical. In 1975, Brazil signed a nuclear energy agreement with Germany to build a nuclear reactor in southern Brazil and to work with Germany in nuclear energy research. Seeing this, their neighbors, the paranoid junta in Argentina, got it into their heads that Brazil was actually secretly making the bomb. And based on that paranoid delusion, Argentina started a clandestine program to build the bomb. The Brazilian junta found out about it and then started their own secret program to build the bomb. And so began a new chapter in the dick-measuring contest that has been going on in South America for the last 200 years, this time using the world's most dangerous weapons. Because Brazil had the larger, wealthier economy and the Argentine economy was, well, Argentina, the Brazilians were always a step ahead in their program. The Brazilians were also secretly helped by China in making the bomb, while Argentina had their nuclear program under a lot of international scrutiny after the Falkland War. This gave Brazil the definite lead in the program, to the point that Brazil actually began constructing the testing site for a soon-to-be-finished bomb. As democracy returned to both, the idea of getting the bomb began to lose steam. So by 1991, Argentina and Brazil agreed to end their nuclear weapons programs and cooperate in nuclear energy research, arguably the only positive to come out of this entire story. This story may seem a bit silly at first, but reveals us something important. If in a region a country starts making the bomb, it can kickstart a regional nuclear arms race that has the potential to destabilize an entire region. Of all the countries we have so far gone through, the ones that got the closest to getting the bomb are Sweden, Japan, Spain, and Brazil. But the country that had a secret nuclear weapons program which got the closest to actually making the bomb and then in the end never made the bomb is someone else: Switzerland. The Swiss nuclear weapons program started the day after the bomb fell on Hiroshima. The government heard the news and decided to build the bomb in that very moment. Initially, the Swiss weren't fully committed with funds and research. Then the 1956 Soviet invasion of Hungary made Switzerland fully commit. The program ran under almost stereotypical Swiss efficiency and precision. Everything was planned out, mapped out, accounted for, and worked perfectly like a fine-tuned, expert-made Swiss watch. The Swiss mapped out a 35-year plan to carefully study how to make a bomb, how and where to acquire the materials, how to assemble the bomb, decided that 200 warheads were desired, where to store bombs and material, how much it would cost, how the costs could be disguised in the federal budget, what delivery vehicle would be used, and how and where the bomb was to be tested. The Swiss even accounted for other eventualities in their program. They held a national referendum on banning nuclear weapons. The Swiss voted against the ban, thereby granting the project a legal stamp of approval in a direct democracy without making it public that the program already existed. They bought American nuclear reactors instead of French reactors to deliberately allow American inspectors in their sites, to create an aura of trustworthiness that was actually part of a planned deception. They helped apartheid South Africa make the bomb, so if they ever got caught, they were able to misdirect investigations by saying that they were actually not getting the bomb for themselves, but just helping the South Africans make the bomb. Their uranium was from the Belgian Congo colony, bought from a Belgium desperately trying to hold on to that colony, thereby getting a large amount with few questions asked. And they picked the French Mirage 3 as their means of delivering the bomb, and yes, that jet can be used to drop the bomb. The most impressive thing about the Swiss project is that throughout the entire 43 years of this process, from 1945 to 1988, the Swiss managed to keep all of it completely secret. No one found out, and nothing ever leaked. From what we know, the Swiss were possibly just a year or even less than half a year away from having the bomb by the mid-1980s. But then the big surprise. In 1988, the Swiss just announced to the world that they had a project to build the bomb and that they were stopping it. And here at this point there's a bit of a disagreement over what actually happened here. One position is that the Swiss bomb ultimately failed, that the lack of know-how combined with all the measures to keep it secret resulted in the project progressing at a snail's pace over the course of 4 decades. And the Swiss army officers who drove this project were largely shaped by the experience of the Second World War. As they began to retire in the 1980s, the project lost steam. The Swiss therefore simply came to terms with the fact that they could not get the bomb. But then there's also another argument about what happened here. We know the Swiss came very close to having the bomb. Now think of all the trouble that countries that secretly develop the bomb have to go through. The sanctions, isolation, becoming a rogue state, and even interventions and war. The Swiss avoided all of that. They walked all the way up to being very close to having the bomb and then just stopped, turned around and announced to the world that they had stopped. They got all the world's praise for not making the bomb. But here's an important thing that almost everyone overlooks. The Swiss never took a step back. They never dismantled the infrastructure, technology, let alone know-how that they had attained on how to get the bomb. They merely announced a halt to the program. So it is possible that throughout the last 40 years, from the mid-1980s right up to today, the Swiss have always just been a year or maybe even less away from having the bomb, permanently sitting on an almost completed project that they could always revive. The argument here is that this may have been the plan from the start. Not to actually get the bomb, but to get as close as possible to the bomb without the consequences of actually having the bomb. We could call this the Mad Hatter's bomb. There is no bomb today, there was no bomb yesterday, but there is always a bomb tomorrow. And by doing that, one gets almost the exact same security assurance as actually having the bomb without actually having the bomb. There are a few countries that I did not mention here in this video. Iran is an ongoing story that isn't over yet. South Africa actually got the bomb during apartheid. It just gave up the bomb when apartheid ended. Myanmar has been suspected of secretly making the bomb for decades, but there is no evidence of this actually being the case. Poland and Australia are sometimes brought up, but none of these countries actually had a secret nuclear weapons program. They merely had governments who considered getting the bomb. Ukraine gave up its Soviet-inherited arsenal and is merely pointing out that the lacking security guarantees that it was promised in return now make this agreement technically invalid. Saudi Arabia made diplomatic inquiries on the possibility of buying the bomb from Pakistan, but hasn't fully committed. Of course, someone out there might be secretly making the bomb right now, and we just don't know it yet. History does not repeat, but we can still learn some things here. The examples just presented might give an idea of what may happen if we enter a world in which nuclear proliferation spreads and becomes more attractive. One thing we learn is that France is the world's most irresponsible nuclear power. That might sound like a loaded statement in a world where North Korea exists, but take a look at all the countries who had secret nuclear weapons programs using nuclear material and technology bought from France. I hope the French learned at least some lessons from this. The Mad Hatter's bomb may be the most attractive prospect for countries considering the bomb, but it is also the most difficult. Iran may actually have the Mad Hatter's bomb right now, and would in that case be an example of how it can go wrong. The Yugoslav clusterfudge bomb, toying dangerously with the possibility of a nuclear disaster, is also a prospect for our future if clusterfudges like communist Venezuela decide to pursue the bomb. The Libyan scenario of trying to buy the bomb is also manifesting with the Saudi inquiries to buy the bomb from Pakistan. A clandestine nuclear arms race, like the one between Argentina and Brazil, could also repeat. If Turkey, which is increasingly becoming a regional power, decides to pursue the bomb, Greece will almost certainly pursue it as well, or try to stop it, throwing the Mediterranean into a situation of increased conflict potential, similar to how Israel and its neighbors repeatedly clashed over the bomb. By far the most likely scenario to repeat, though, is that of the Romanian escape plan bomb. If we are going to re-enter a 19th century style dog-eat-dog world of great power poker players and small nation poker chips in competing spheres of influence, just as MAGA and Putin envision for us, then getting the bomb to escape a sphere of influence is an increasingly attractive proposition to a lot of countries around the world. Here in Europe, it's the Swedish scenario of the 1950s that is most relevant to us. The war started by Russia and the increasing threats by Russia are the main reason why so many European countries openly discuss nuclear proliferation. There are other solutions, such as France and Britain extending the nuclear umbrella and creating a European nuclear umbrella. There is, however, a problem with that. The idea that French nuclear weapons should not only protect France, but all of Europe, is very controversial and even unpopular in France. And Britain, who likes the idea of a European nuclear umbrella, is in the awkward position of having made itself entirely dependent on the Americans in the delivery system of its nuclear warheads. Whether or not a country like Sweden dusts off its old nuclear program, or Poland and Ukraine begin to pursue such a program, will depend on the French, and of course, on what the Americans do next. Trump frequently talked about nuclear arms control treaties in his foreign policy agenda, if one can even call it that. He seems to have an obsession with the famous treaties signed in the 1970s and 1980s, limiting the number of nuclear warheads between the United States and the Soviet Union. These treaties happened when he was a young man and might have left a lasting impression on him as a high mark of what foreign policy achievements are supposed to be. What Trump forgets is that these treaties mattered because they were between superpowers that were leading alliances. If the Soviets or Americans had dismantled their alliances, these treaties would have been worthless. An arms control treaty that Trump could sign with Putin while sacrificing European allies for it would do nothing to limit nuclear weapons. The opposite, it would encourage the former American allies to pursue nuclear weapons after having been abandoned just to get a treaty that Trump may think looks nice but would ultimately be worthless. Trump has made nuclear proliferation far more likely in the world we now live in, especially if Trump's foreign policy now becomes the American standard. Thank you for watching. Don't forget the Discord server if you would like to talk with me about the video or with the wider community in the voice chats and text chats. And thank you to all of you who donate to my channel through PayPal and Patreon. Every donation is appreciated, no matter how small. I got a little sidetracked working on this one. I did not expect this topic to be so deep and involve so many countries. I hope to see you all soon again with another video.